Handcuffed my uncle to a tree. Seconds later, I arrived in combat uniform. Staff Sergeant Myra Lynette, U.S. Army, 13th Airborne, retired. They zip-tied my uncle to a pecan tree like he was trash. I still remember the rasp of his voice on the phone, choked with confusion and fear. Baby, they said I don't belong here. I was halfway across town, headed home from reserve training when I got the call. He wasn't just my uncle, he was the man who raised me after my mom passed, a former high school principal, a church deacon, a man who had lived on that same land since 1967. And someone with a clipboard and a badge that meant absolutely nothing decided to erase all of that? I floored it. The neighborhood was called Oak Ridge Heights, but it felt more like a stage-set perfect hedges, pastel siding, and a fake HOA president named Beverly Klein, who wore mirrored sunglasses like she was in the Secret Service. Her group of volunteers wore khakis and smugness like armor. They called themselves the Compliance Unit. That afternoon, they declared my uncle's presence a threat to community uniformity because he had been trimming the wildflowers on the lot next to his houseland he owned. Beverly claimed the property lines were under review and that my uncle had no right to be there until the board concluded ownership. So they zip-tied a 72-year-old man to a tree in public. I arrived seconds later, engine roaring. I was still in uniform combat boots, insignia, the patch on my sleeve that once made insurgents pause. Beverly didn't flinch. "This doesn't concern you," she said, her voice clipped. "It concerns me now," I said, standing between her and my uncle. "You assaulted a veteran homeowner on his own land. Unlawful detention, public humiliation." I took a photo, and now it concerns every media outlet in the state. That moment cracked everything wide open. Neighbors started filming. One woman yelled, "That's Pastor Langston!" A younger man shouted, "He taught my dad algebra." Beverly stammered. The two men with her clipboard commandos looked ready to bolt. I pulled out my phone and called an old friend at the county sheriff's department. 20 minutes later, squad cars pulled up, lights flashing. It turns out that Oak Ridge HOA wasn't legally incorporated. Their bylaws copy-pasted from another neighborhood 3 counties away. Their fines illegal. Their so-called volunteer enforcement unit totally unauthorized. But here's the twist. Beverly had applied for grant funding under the guise of being a civic authority. Over $200,000 in federal funds had been funneled into beautification projects that didn't exist. My uncle's case just the latest in a string of targeted harassment campaigns. I wasn't alone in digging deeper. I connected with residents who had been fined for growing heirloom tomatoes, for flying the wrong flag, for installing birdhouses. We formed a coalition. Veterans, teachers, a local lawyer named Shauna, a woman whose wheelchair ramp had once been cited as unsightly. We brought everything to the city council. The meeting was packed. Beverly tried to speak, but the roar of voices of truth drowned her out. She resigned that night. Her so-called HOA dissolved. Investigated for fraud. My uncle, he was honored at City Hall. A new ordinance now makes it illegal for any unregistered group to enforce codes in our county. And me, I've never been more proud to wear this uniform. Because justice doesn't wear khakis and sunglasses. It wears courage. The truth didn't just spill out, it had to be pried loose, like rusted nails from old wood. What began as one outrageous act against my uncle turned into a full-blown excavation of every lie, every backdoor deal, every fake signature buried beneath the picket fences of Oak Ridge Heights. The day after the handcuff incident, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my uncle's living room, watching him wince as I cleaned the raw abrasions on his wrists. "I thought I was going crazy," he muttered. "Thought maybe I was the one confused. But I remember planting that fig tree out back with your mama when she was 8. This is our land." He didn't have to prove that to me, but I wanted documentation. Hard, irrefutable proof. So I pulled out his old file boxes from the shed, some dusty with age. Others still neatly labeled in his precise handwriting, land deeds. 1967, 1990. Water bills. Property line survey, 1995. By 3 Ashum. I had assembled a timeline that painted a very different story than the one Beverly and her goons were selling. The lot she claimed was in dispute had been legally merged with my uncle's parcel in 1994. I found the notarized map. The county assessor's seal was still crisp. But here's what set off the alarm bells: a second document, dated just 4 months ago. It showed a mysterious boundary clarification filed on behalf of the Oak Ridge Heights HOA, filed by someone named R. J. Klein, Beverly's husband. That document was not signed by my uncle, but the signature line bore his name misspelled. I snapped a photo and sent it to Shauna, the local lawyer from down the block. "This is forgery." She messaged back in all caps, "You're sitting on a gold mine of legal leverage." By noon, I was at City Hall with Shauna. We requested the full file of zoning and HOA records for the area. The clerk on duty raised an eyebrow when we asked about the boundary clarification. She clicked around, then leaned forward. "This isn't a city file," she whispered. "It's private. Looks like someone submitted it directly through a third-party property management portal. It was never certified. So, this HOA I started doesn't legally exist in our system," she finished. "The city never approved their articles of incorporation. They're a ghost." That night, I made a decision. I didn't want just retribution. I wanted exposure. I called in favors, military buddies, old friends in law school, even a few journalists I'd worked with during a veterans housing campaign. By Friday, a small team of us had dubbed the whole mess the fence line files, because that's where it all started. That imaginary line supposedly separating my uncle's yard from community property. A line they made up, a line they weaponized. The files revealed more than just that one forgery. We found HOA violations issued against other residents for absurd reasons. A widow fined $150 for hanging wind chimes without committee approval. A bilingual couple reported for excessive signage after putting up a welcome mat in Spanish. One man's kid drew chalk on the sidewalk. He got slapped with a citation for defacement. Every one of these infractions had been documented by Beverly's so-called HOA compliance team. Her enforcers, 2 realtors and a retired insurance agent, wore matching vests and carried body cams, not for transparency, but to intimidate. And the money trail was damning. The compliance fines had been directed into a private bank account registered under Klein Civic Beautification Trust. That account had purchased patio furniture for Beverly's home, paid for landscaping services on her street only, and even covered a $9,000 community seminar held at a vineyard 3 towns over where no residents were invited. We packaged all of this into a secure digital report, complete with scanned documents, photos, and video testimonies. The final version of the fence line files was 184 pages long. I burned it onto 5 thumb drives and hand-delivered one to the county attorney. "Prepare for a hellstorm," he said, glancing at the table of contents. The community turned fast after that. At first, people were cautious. Oak Ridge Heights was a place where people smiled in passing, but rarely looked one another in the eye. But now, heads turned. Neighbors started knocking on each other's doors. One evening, I hosted a community meeting right in my uncle's front yard. We brought out folding chairs, lemonade, and a projector. I showed highlights from the files on a bedsheet screen. Faces turned red, mouths dropped open. People wept. Shauna stood up and read the list of residents who'd been fined illegally. We passed around a sign-up sheet to join the formal lawsuit. Even the ones who had supported Beverly at first, the golf cart crowd, now seemed shaken. "I thought she was just trying to keep the neighborhood nice," one man muttered. "I didn't know she was robbing us blind." But the tension was far from over. A week after the first meeting, Beverly and her husband came by in a black SUV. She stepped out in full fake regalia, clipboard, sunglasses, laminated badge. I was watering my uncle's fig tree. She walked up and tried to hand me a new cease and desist letter. "Ma'am," I said flatly, "this property is no longer under your jurisdiction. In fact, you never had jurisdiction. I'm warning you," she said. "You're inciting insurrection." Against what I snapped. "Your imagination." She looked like she might slap me. I didn't flinch. Instead, I pulled out my phone and hit record. Tell the camera, I said. Tell them why you zip-tied a 72-year-old man to a tree. She stormed off. 3 days later, she filed a restraining order against my uncle for harassment. That was the moment the fight shifted, because now the system had to choose. Whose version of the truth would it recognize? And that's when the first anonymous letter arrived. Folded into my uncle's mailbox was a plain envelope. Inside was a scanned ledger unmarked, but clear. It listed every dollar collected in fines since 2019. It matched what we'd found in the files and included names we hadn't even known were targeted. On the back, scrawled in pen, she's been laundering it through HOA vendors. Follow the mulch orders. I stared at it for a long time. Someone on the inside was ready to flip. And Beverly. She had no idea how deep this was about to go. There's something about watching a liar squirm under real authority. No sunglasses to hide behind, no clipboards, just truth, pressing in like heat through a cracked windshield. And Beverly Klein. She finally hit that wall. It started with mulch, not the metaphorical kind. Actual mulch, $25,000 worth of it. Shauna and I had followed the tip from the anonymous letter. We pulled every vendor receipt tied to the Klein Civic Beautification Trust. At first glance, it looked legitimate invoices from companies like Green Touch Landscaping and Eco Mulch Solutions LLC. But a closer look told a different story. Those companies didn't exist. Eco Mulch's listed address was an empty lot. Green Touch's tax ID matched a frozen LLC in another state shut down for fraud in 2018. Every check Beverly wrote to them deposited into an account tied to an offshore shell company registered in Panama. And who authorized those transactions? A single name, R.J. Klein, her husband. By this point, our file had grown so damning that the County Fraud Division scheduled a formal hearing not just to consider charges, but to question the legality of everything Oak Ridge Heights HOA had done in the last 3 years. They called it an administrative inquiry. We called it what it really was, the interrogation. It took place in the basement conference room of the county clerk's office, a gray-walled, fluorescent-lit box with no windows and no patience for lies. I sat in the second row beside Shauna. My uncle was on my other side, quiet but radiating resolve. His wrists still bore the faint marks from the zip ties. In front of us sat 2 long tables, one for the County Compliance Oversight Committee, the other for Beverly and her attorney. She wore her usual uniform, a navy blue pantsuit, a thick gold necklace, and that same false smile that had once ruled over front yards and driveways like a suburban empress. But now she was fidgeting. The committee chair began calmly. Ms. Klein, we've received credible allegations of forged property documents, illegal detentions, and misappropriation of funds associated with the organization known as Oak Ridge Heights Homeowners Association. Do you understand the nature of this hearing? Beverly nodded. Her lawyer, some stiff, corporate type with a Bluetooth earpiece, still and whispered something in her ear. Let's begin with the incident on March 12th. The chair continued. You and 2 men in uniform detained a man named Langston Tate. He was trespassing. Beverly interrupted. I stood up. Objection, Shauna said smoothly. Mr. Tate owns the land in question. The deed was submitted with our affidavit. The chair raised an eyebrow. Ms. Klein, do you have any documents that refute Mr. Tate's property ownership? Beverly reached into her briefcase, pulled out the same forged boundary clarification form, and froze, because the bottom corner now bore a sticky note in red ink forgery, verified false signature, Source County Records Office. Her hand trembled. The chair read it aloud. Miss Klein, it appears you've presented a forged document to this board. Do you wish to explain? That was the moment her lawyer leaned in and whispered again. For a few seconds, she looked furious. Then defeated. She finally spoke. I didn't forge it, she said, voice thin. My husband did. I thought he was handling things legally. He said if we didn't draw clear lines, the neighborhood would fall apart. People were planting junk vegetables, flags, making it look uncontrolled. The silence in the room was suffocating. The chair asked the next question coldly. Did you authorize the zip tying of Mr. Tate? I gave the order, Beverly said. And do you acknowledge he had committed no crime? Another long pause. Yes, she said. But we were trying to establish control. The neighborhood needed order. No, the chair said flatly. You needed obedience. Next came the finances. A county auditor took the floor and projected images from the fence line files. They showed line by line how community beautification funds were laundered. The vineyard retreat, the exclusive catering orders, the fake mulch companies, and then the account numbers. The auditor displayed the wire transfers linking Beverly's account to the shell corporations. That's when Beverly's attorney stood. We request a recess, he said. Request denied, the chair replied. You were notified of discovery a week ago. That broke her. Beverly slumped forward, head in hands. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she mumbled. I just wanted control, prestige. I stood up. You zip-tied a man who taught 2 generations of kids in this town. I said, my voice steady. You humiliated him in public, and then you tried to cover it up with lies for money. She wouldn't look at me, but the interrogation wasn't over, because we still didn't know who had sent the anonymous tip. The chair asked, do you know who may have sent the internal ledger of your transactions to the plaintiffs? Beverly glanced up, eyes wet now. No, she whispered, but it had to be someone close. Maybe Roger's assistant. She kept asking questions. That was all we needed. Within 48 hours, the assistant came forward, granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. She handed over dozens of emails, internal memos, notes revealing the ultimate plan to slowly convert Oak Ridge Heights into a private, gated community, rezoning it, controlling resale rights, and pushing out problematic residents like my uncle through manufactured code violations and financial pressure. It was textbook class warfare with a racial undercurrent so thick you could choke on it. They never expected anyone to fight back. They never expected me. That night, after the hearing adjourned, I walked my uncle back to his porch. He sat slowly, then smiled at me. You're your mama's daughter, he said, with a little extra fire. I laughed. I just hate bullies. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind through the fig tree. Across the street, a young couple was repainting their front door, something Beverly had once fined them for. It was bright turquoise now. Freedom had a color, and we weren't done yet, because exposing Beverly was just the beginning. Next came the cleanup, the healing, the rebuild. You'd think justice would be clean like a gavel drops and the bad guys vanish. But justice doesn't collapse in one hit. It crumbles. And in Oak Ridge Heights, it started with whispers, then documents, then doors slamming shut on people who used to rule with clipboards and threats. After the interrogation, everything changed. The city council froze all pending permits and fund transfers tied to the Oak Ridge Heights HOA. The bank accounts were seized for audit. Beverly and her husband, Roger, were placed under formal investigation for financial fraud, forgery, and unlawful restraint. But what made it real, what made the community feel it was the sign? 1 week after the hearing, a construction crew showed up and tore down the metal Oak Ridge Heights HOA office placard outside the old clubhouse. They didn't say a word, just unbolted it and drove off. Beverly's headquarters gone. The message was clear: your reign is over. Still, collapse brings dust, and we all felt it. My uncle stopped going out for his morning walks. He said the silence was too loud. It's like the place doesn't know who it is anymore, he murmured one morning, watching the wind bend the grass along the fence line. A few neighbors withdrew, too unsure who to trust. Embarrassed, they once cheered the very people who fined them for cracked garden stones or mismatched shutters. That's the cruelty of systems like fake HOAs. They don't just take money, they take community. They make neighbors into spies and compliance into fear. So when it broke apart, we were left with a void. But that void, that's where truth had room to grow. It began strangely with a bake sale. Shauna organized it. Sounds silly. I know, she said, shrugging. But if we can get people back into their yard, back talking, we can fix this. She set up tables in the greenbelt. Beverly once tried to fence off. Kids painted signs. The local barber donated lemonade. My uncle, for the first time since the hearing, made his sweet potato pies. People came. Not all at once. Not in a parade, but in small, tentative waves. Faces I hadn't seen smile in months. Old men brought folding chairs. Moms brought juice boxes. And people talked. We didn't just raise funds for the legal team. We raised hope. More importantly, we started retelling the truth, our truth. The stories people shared that day weren't about lawns. They were about dignity stolen and reclaimed. One woman broke down as she admitted she let Beverly scare her into removing her Black Lives Matter sign. A teenager confessed he stopped playing his violin outside because the HOA once fined his parents for noise pollution. That's what shook me most. They didn't just try to control property. They tried to erase identity. But truth has a way of echoing louder when it's said aloud. And the moment that shook the whole neighborhood, it came from Mr. Arlo, 89, Korean War veteran, lived on the corner lot with the red brick chimney. He asked to speak. We gave him the mic. Years ago, he said, his voice gravelly but clear, this neighborhood helped my wife through cancer. You brought meals, you held her hand, but somewhere along the way, we stopped being neighbors. We became watchers. Fines replaced kindness, fear replaced community, and I let it happen. He looked up, eyes wet, but not anymore. He set down his cane and raised his fist not high, but enough to make people cheer. That was the turning point. Meanwhile, Beverly and Roger were unraveling in real time. The media picked up the story after a journalist from the Tri-State Ledger published an expose titled Mulch, Money, and Manufactured Power, the fake HOA that turned on its town. The article went viral. Clips from the interrogation hearing hit social media. The footage of my uncle zip-tied to the tree combined with a shot of me in full uniform confronting Beverly lit up timelines nationwide. Comments poured in. This is why community oversight matters. She messed with the wrong family? That soldier is the hero we all need. The backlash spread fast. Beverly was banned from her church board. Roger's real estate license was suspended, and a class action lawsuit was greenlit for everyone fined or intimidated by the fake HOA's actions. But the real collapse, the soul-crushing fall, came when Beverly was forced to give a public deposition. It wasn't filmed, but I was there. She looked different, smaller. Her voice wavered. Her lawyer sat back, arms crossed, done saving her. She admitted the whole plan was Roger's idea, but confessed she liked the power. People started treating me with respect. She said, almost childlike, for once, I mattered. I leaned in. Respect isn't something you steal. I said quietly, it's something you earn. She didn't argue. When asked what she'd say to the people she'd hurt, she stared at the table for a long time before whispering, I'm sorry. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. No, the attorney said. You were protecting a lie. By the end of the week, Oak Ridge Heights officially rescinded all HOA citations and fees issued over the past 5 years. The county appointed a neutral civic mediator to help residents form a real neighborhood association, this time with democratic elections, transparent bylaws, and zero power to detain anyone. The clubhouse. It was open to the public for free workshops and tutoring. The HOA patrol vests burned in a backyard bonfire. Legal or not, I didn't care. But there was one last thing to do. We held a memorial. Not for a person, but for the community we lost. In the park near the pecan tree where they zip-tied my uncle, we built a small stone marker. It reads, in honor of truth, justice, and the neighbors who stood together when silence was easier. That night, I sat with my uncle under the fig tree again. He handed me a slice of pie, then patted my shoulder. You didn't just fight for me, he said. You reminded this town who we are. Maybe that's what it takes. Sometimes, not war, not revenge, but remembrance of who we used to be and who we can be again. The town didn't look different. Not at first. The sidewalks were still cracked in places. The homes still wore pastel paint and white shutters. The fig tree still dropped leaves in my uncle's yard, just like it had for 30 years. But something had shifted. You could hear it in the quiet. You could feel it in the greetings that no longer felt forced. You could see it in the porch light staying on a little later, welcoming people instead of warning them. And on the second Saturday of the new season, we gathered under an open sky to lay down a new foundation, not of bricks or bylaws, but of principles. It wasn't just about what we tore down. It was about what we built in its place. The new association wasn't called an HOA. That word had become a bruise. Instead, the residents voted to call it the Oak Ridge Neighborhood Council, a body with no enforcement power. Only community coordination. No fines, no patrols, no threat letters, just town hall meetings, resource sharing, and collective decision-making. We met in what used to be the HOA Clubhouse, now renamed the Langston Tate Community Center, after my uncle. I'll never forget the look on his face when they unveiled the bronze plaque near the front entrance. For his wisdom, his dignity, and his refusal to be moved. He cried. I did too. The first official act of the council. To issue formal apologies, not vague regrets, but direct, signed letters to every resident wronged by the fake HOA. Shauna helped draft them. I hand-delivered many myself. One woman clutched hers and whispered, "This means everything." She'd stopped gardening after a bogus violation almost cost her job. Now, her yard bloomed again, wild and proud. Another man, former military like me, hugged me at his door. "I didn't fight overseas to be silenced at home," he said. "Thank you for giving us our voices back." But rebuilding wasn't just emotional, it was practical. We launched 3 new initiatives through the council, the Property Rights Education Program, free workshops led by real estate professionals and attorneys, teaching homeowners their rights and how to identify HOA scams. The Veterans Outreach Network, connecting local vets with city services, medical care, and community projects. Porch Project Saturdays, rotating work crews made up of neighbors, fixing fences, painting shutters, and helping elderly residents with repairs, no forms, no permission slips, just people helping people. Still, not everyone embraced the change right away. Some residents, especially those who had once enforced the fake rules, felt displaced. One woman cornered me after a meeting and asked bitterly, "So now you're in charge? No one's in charge." I said calmly, "That's the point, but people need order." I nodded. "We're not removing structure, we're removing fear." She didn't reply, but at the next meeting, she signed up for the Porch Project. Change is slow, but it's steady when it's real. As for Beverly, her collapse was complete. She and Roger were indicted on 5 counts of fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit forgery. They took a plea deal in exchange for full restitution, over $210,000 repaid to the community through a court-ordered fund. They sold their house quietly and moved 2 counties away. No goodbye, no farewell speech, just silence. And honestly, that was enough. We didn't need vengeance. We needed vindication. Months later, I stood in my uncle's yard again, watching the sun rise over a new neighborhood. He was standing beside the fig tree, holding a mug of coffee. The scars on his wrists had faded, but the fire in his spirit had only grown. "They tried to make me feel small," he said, "but look what they built around me instead." I smiled. "They built a wall, and you became the cornerstone." He chuckled. "That your preacher side talking, nah." I said, "That's the soldier in me." I've thought a lot about what it means to wear this uniform back home. In combat zones, you expect to protect your country, but in quiet places like Oak Ridge, the enemies wear smiles. They build fake walls of power. They hide behind rules and signatures and fine print, but you still fight them the same way, by standing up, by telling the truth, by making noise when silence feels safer. And maybe that's the new standard. Not more laws and more listening, Not more rules, more respect, not more fences, more front porches with open doors, because justice isn't about punishment, it's about healing. And community isn't built by compliance, it's built by connection. So here's to the fig tree, to the pie on the porch, to the teenager drawing chalk again without fear, to the soldier who didn't stay silent, to the man who wouldn't be moved, to a town that remembered who it really was when it mattered most. Oak Ridge didn't just survive, it rose. Inaudible one.